Let's see how you handle this. Carter, an equation even the experts find impossible. The words dripped with mockery, a teacher's attempt to humiliate a black student before the entire class. But what Mr. Whitaker didn't know was that this moment would become the biggest mistake of his academic career. Welcome to Black Stories. Hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from, because this story is not just about the bully. It's about how a black student stood firm and turned humiliation into triumph. The classroom was alive with its usual noise, the hum of whispers, the scratching of pens against paper, the faint vibration of phones hidden beneath desks. Morning sunlight spilled through wide windows, casting long beams across the rows of students. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary Tuesday in an American high school. But for Carter Miles, 16, a quiet storm brewed beneath the polished surface of routine. He sat in the third row, his notebooks perfectly aligned, pencils sharpened down to neat points. It was a habit born of necessity. In a world that often ignored or dismissed him, order was one of the few things he could control. Each page of notes was written with precision, formulas carefully boxed, steps numbered with exact clarity. He rarely spoke unless called upon. In silence, he built walls. The walls were needed. He had learned early that classrooms were not neutral places. They carried weight. Glances that lingered too long, jokes tossed too casually, praise given selectively. In Mr. Whitaker's math class, Carter felt those patterns sharper than anywhere else. Mr. Whitaker was a man of pressed shirts and smug smiles, a teacher who measured his students not only by their answers, but by who he thought deserved to give them. And Carter, brilliant though he was rarely among the chosen. It began subtly. Each time Carter raised his hand, Whitaker's eyes drifted past him, landing instead on students with easier questions or answers half right. When Carter's voice did reach the room, Whitaker's acknowledgement came late, sometimes with a faint sigh, as though patience was being wasted. Other students noticed. Some mimicked it, others absorbed it. Little phrases slipped into the air like poison. You talk too proper, bet you're on some scholarship, you're trying too hard. Each one framed as a joke, but each cutting deeper than words suggested. Then there was Mason, loud, confident, the kind of classmate who thrived under Whitaker's approval. He sat near the back, a varsity jacket draped over his chair, his laughter carrying farther than it should. Mason had decided long ago that Carter was fair game. He mocked his voice, whispered imitations of his careful speech, nudged his friends into fits of laughter whenever Carter walked to the board. Sometimes the jokes slid under Carter's skin like needles. Sometimes, worse, they drew laughter from others who should have known better. That day, Whitaker stood at the front with chalk in hand, the sound of it dragging across the board. He wrote quickly, each symbol sprawling into the next, filling the surface with a tangled nest of fractions, exponents, and parentheses. The equation sprawled across the blackboard like a beast, layered and complex, designed not to teach but to overwhelm. When he finished, he stepped back, brushing his hands together as though he had summoned something no ordinary student could tame. His eyes scanned the room, pausing deliberately. "Carter," he called, his voice laced with something just shy of amusement. "Why don't you give this one a try?" A ripple of sound moved through the class. Snickers, whispered comments, the creak of chairs as students leaned forward to watch. Mason's laugh rang loudest, a cruel note cutting through the air. Carter's stomach tightened. His palms dampened as he pushed back his chair and rose. Every step to the board echoed louder in his ears, each one weighted by the eyes that followed. He took the chalk, feeling its rough edge against his fingers, and stared at the labyrinth of numbers and symbols before him. It wasn't impossible, he realized, not if he could focus. There was structure hidden in the chaos. But Whitaker's tone hadn't invited him to solve. It had invited him to fail. The silence of the room pressed in. Behind him, a few students whispered, their laughter muffled but unmistakable. Mason muttered something that sparked another round of chuckles. Carter blinked hard, forcing back the sting rising in his eyes. He wouldn't give them that. Not here, not now. He began to map the problem in his mind, tracing steps, seeing faint paths of order beneath the clutter. But just as his chalk hovered to make the first mark, Whitaker's voice cut through the room. "Never mind. We don't have all day." The chalk froze in his hand. Laughter burst openly now, filling the classroom like smoke. Mason clapped mockingly, and others joined in, the sound drowning the fragile calm Carter had held on to. Slowly, he set the chalk down and turned. His face was calm, his back straight, his steps measured as he walked back to his desk. But inside, something shifted. It was small at first, a spark beneath the ashes of humiliation. They thought they had defined him with their laughter, that he would shrink in his silence again. But in Carter's chest, a new resolve was taking root. At his desk, he sat quietly, his hands resting on the clean page of his notebook. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes told a different story, bright, unyielding, and ready. The laughter echoed around him, but he no longer heard it. All he saw was the equation still burning in his mind. It would not end here. The laughter from the classroom did not stay trapped within those walls. By evening, it had followed Carter into the digital world, louder, sharper, more relentless than ever. The clip had been recorded, of course. Phones had been out, lenses peering between desks, capturing the moment Carter stood frozen at the board as the teacher dismissed him. Now it lived online, cut into a short, cruel loop. Whitaker's smirk, the chalk untouched, Mason's mocking clap. The captions written over it stung like open wounds. Affirmative action algebra. Math genius? Yeah, right, scholarship kid can't solve. The video spread through group chats first, then TikTok, then Instagram Reels. By midnight, it had been reshared hundreds of times across the student body. Comments poured in, some in jest, some barbed with racism thinly disguised as humor. Carter tried to ignore it, turning his phone face down, but the glow of notifications refused to let him forget. Even silence was loud when the whole world seemed to laugh. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of reheated noodles, the hum of the fridge filling the small kitchen. His mother sat at the table, still in her scrubs after a double shift, flipping through next week's schedule. His father rubbed his shoulder, worn from another long day at the auto shop. His younger sister colored at the table, humming quietly, oblivious to the storm in her brother's chest. They didn't know the details, not yet, but they felt the weight in the way Carter avoided their eyes, the way he pushed food around his plate without eating. Later that night, when the apartment fell quiet, Carter retreated to his room. On his desk sat a battered notebook, its corners bent, its pages filled with scribbles and symbols. Across the cover, written in block letters, was a phrase, if slash then. It was his sanctuary, his language of order. In a world that mocked his silence, numbers listened. Equations didn't care about the color of his skin. They cared only for truth. He flipped to a blank page and rewrote the monstrous problem from memory. Each fraction, each exponent, each nested parenthesis came back to him with surprising clarity. He stared at it for a long time, his pencil tapping lightly against the margin. Slowly, the chaos began to take shape. He saw patterns, faint but undeniable. A factor here, a hidden symmetry there. Beneath the mess, there was order waiting to be revealed. His breath slowed. His pencil moved. The page filled with arrows, cancellations, notes. What Whitaker had paraded as impossible was not unsolvable at all. It was theater designed to overwhelm and humiliate. Carter felt heat rise in his chest, not of shame, but of awakening. They wanted him to fail, but they hadn't counted on his persistence. The next night, he sat in the cafeteria, long after the lights dimmed, scratching through more problems under the glow of a flickering bulb. That was when Ms. Alvarez, the night custodian, stopped in her tracks. She was carrying a mop bucket when she saw him hunched over his notebook, lines of equations stretching across the page. Curious, she stepped closer. "That looks harder than my calculus homework," she said softly. Carter looked up, startled, then offered a shy smile. Ms. Alvarez was more than a custodian. She was also a community college student, quietly pursuing her degree. She sat across from him, scanning his notes with practiced eyes. With calm precision, she pointed out a simpler way to structure one of his steps. Don't solve the performance, she said, tapping the page. Solve the problem. Those words stuck. Over the next days, Carter dove deeper. He watched math lectures online, scribbled identities and theorems across notebook after notebook. He practiced factoring late at night, ramen growing cold beside him. On Saturdays, he slipped into the public library where a retired professor hosted a math circle. Dr. Lang, wiry-haired and sharp-eyed, noticed Carter's intensity. If it looks impossible, he said, sliding him a reference sheet, change the lens. Sometimes math isn't hard. It's just dressed up in a costume. The more Carter practiced, the clearer the path became. Whitaker's trap wasn't clever. It was cruel. The equation could be solved, step by step, with patience and precision. And Carter was determined to not just solve it, but to show everyone exactly how. Before bed, he pinned a scrap of paper above his desk. Prove what's true, even when they don't want it to be. He lay back, staring at the words, the noise of humiliation still echoing from the world outside. But beneath it all, something stronger pulsed. Resolve. He wasn't preparing to survive their laughter anymore. He was preparing to silence it. Rumors had a way of spreading faster than truth, and within days, Carter realized Mr. Whitaker wasn't done with him. Flyers began appearing on classroom walls and in the hallways, bold black letters scrawled across white paper. Math mayhem. Beat the board challenge. Whitaker had dressed it up as a fun academic event, an opportunity for students to tackle graduate-level problems in front of their peers. But Carter knew better. This was theater. This was Whitaker's stage. And once again, Carter was being cast as the unwilling actor. By the third day, Mason was already taunting him openly. Your big rematch. He jeered in the cafeteria, holding one of the flyers above his head like a banner. Ready to embarrass yourself again? His friends laughed, their voices bouncing off the walls, feeding on the idea that Carter would be Whitaker's prop once more. Carter ignored them outwardly, but inside, his resolve only grew sharper. He understood now. This wasn't about solving math problems. This was about power. Who got to define intelligence? Who got to control the narrative? Who got to stand at the board and be seen as worthy? Whitaker had weaponized mathematics, not as a tool for learning, but as a trap for humiliation. If Carter was going to stand before that board again, he wouldn't just survive it. He would dismantle the performance entirely. So he prepared, not with frantic memorization or desperate guessing, but with discipline and strategy. Each night, he sat at his desk with his if/then notebook open wide, filling page after page with step-by-step breakdowns. He didn't just want the answers, he wanted the roadmaps. He practiced writing out every move with clarity, labeling identities, underlining transitions. He rehearsed explanations aloud, timing his words, learning how to control the rhythm of the room. When his sister wandered into his room one night, Carter asked her to play audience. She sat cross-legged on the bed as he wrote across his whiteboard. "Why'd you do that?" she asked after one step. Her question, simple and unfiltered, forced Carter to slow down, to explain not just what he was doing but why it mattered. The more he practiced this way, the stronger his confidence grew. He wasn't just solving problems. He was teaching the solution, shaping it so that anyone could follow. Ms. Alvarez checked in again, finding him hunched over in the cafeteria. She listened quietly as he explained a proof, then raised an eyebrow. "Don't forget clarity," she reminded him. "If they can't see the beauty in the step, they'll think it's a trick." She tapped the marker against his notes. "You don't just want to win, you want to teach. That's how you shut down doubt." At the Saturday library math circle, Dr. Lang leaned in after watching Carter finish a complex proof. "Remember this," he said firmly. "Mathematics isn't a gate. It's a door. Don't let him use it as a lock against you." Carter absorbed every word. He carried them with him like armor. By now, the path to Whitaker's problem was engraved in his mind. He knew the traps, the hidden discontinuities, the messy conjugates designed to scare away logic. He knew how to untangle them, how to simplify the mess into something clear and undeniable. And most importantly, he knew how to anticipate Whitaker's interruptions. If the teacher tried to shift the goalposts, Carter would already have the answers prepared. Still, whispers persisted. A guidance counselor pulled him aside, suggesting it might be wiser not to participate. A well-meaning classmate muttered that he'd just embarrass himself again. Every comment was meant to protect him, or so they claimed. But Carter saw the truth. They weren't protecting him. They were protecting the system, the silence, the status quo. Late one night, he sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, staring at the roadmap he had drawn for himself. Step by step, a clean line from chaos to order. He folded the page and slipped it into his notebook. For the first time since the laughter had echoed through that classroom, Carter felt a different rhythm inside him. Not fear, not shame, but certainty. He wasn't just going back to solve an equation. He was going back to prove a point. That truth, when spoken clearly and without apology, could not be silenced. The day of the so-called math mayhem arrived with an energy unlike any ordinary lesson. The classroom buzzed with restless anticipation, desks rearranged into a semicircle, turning the space into something closer to an arena than a place of learning. Phones peeked from half-zipped backpacks and barely hidden hands. Everyone knew something was about to happen. At the center stood Mr. Whitaker, chalk in hand, his posture tall with the smug assurance of a man convinced of his own control. Behind him, the board bore a new monster of a problem. Layers of exponents, convoluted fractions, nested radicals sprawled across the black surface. He tapped the chalk against it for emphasis, leaving tiny white scars with each knock. This, he announced, his voice carrying mockery disguised as challenge, is a problem even experts find nearly impossible. But perhaps Carter would like another chance to show us his skills. Laughter rippled through the room, Mason leading with a loud snort. Whispers flared, phones lifted higher. All eyes turned toward Carter. For a moment, silence wrapped around him. His pulse drummed heavy in his ears as he rose. Each step to the board echoed with memory. Whitaker's smirk, Mason's jeer, the sting of humiliation weeks before. But this time, Carter carried something else inside him. Certainty. His notebook, his late-night practice, the encouragement of those who believed in him. They had built a foundation stronger than fear. He reached the board and took the chalk. His hand did not tremble. Instead of diving in, he turned to the class. "I'm going to show you how to break this down," he said, his voice steady. The words weren't just for them. They were for himself. He began with definitions. Step by step, he wrote each property he would use. Then, slowly, he dismantled the beast. First, a cancellation hidden in plain sight, an identical factor that shrank the problem by half. Gasps rose as the crowd leaned forward. Carter explained why the cancellation worked, pausing long enough for everyone to follow. This, he said, underlining the denominator, isn't allowed when x equals this value. That's the trick. It looks messy, but it's just a removable hole. He pressed on. A tangle of radicals collapsed when he multiplied by a conjugate, simplifying what had once looked impenetrable. He circled terms, drew arrows, boxed simplifications. At each stage, he paused to name what he was doing, not rushing, not hiding behind jargon. He wasn't just solving. He was teaching. The room shifted. The whispers stopped, replaced by the faint sound of pens scribbling as students began to copy his work. Mason's smirk faltered, his phone forgotten on the desk. Whitaker interrupted, voice tight. "You must have memorized this trick." But Carter didn't falter. He calmly explained the logic again, pointing to the very definitions in chalk on the side of the board. Proof, not performance. The kind that left no room for dismissal. Finally, after a series of clean reductions, the monster shrank to a simple integer. Carter boxed the answer with one steady stroke, then turned back to the room. Silence held for a moment, heavy and undeniable. Then from the back, a single clap. Another followed. Soon, the room filled with applause, uneven at first, then rolling into a wave that drowned the memory of laughter weeks before. Whitaker's face tightened. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. The performance he had crafted had crumbled in his own hands. The student he had tried to humiliate had not only solved the problem, but had done so with a clarity that exposed the weakness in Whitaker's cruelty. Carter set the chalk down gently. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply walked back to his desk, head high, the applause still echoing. For the first time, the board did not feel like a place of humiliation. It felt like a place of truth. And Whitaker, standing stiff at the front, knew he had just lost control of the story forever. The video spread before Carter even left the classroom. Phones had caught every second. The jeers that died into silence. The sound of chalk tracing order from chaos. The final boxed answer, and the stunned look on Mr. Whitaker's face. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Group chats, Instagram stories, TikTok feeds. Unlike the first video, the comments weren't mocking. They carried awe. Bro just shut the whole class down. He saw that? No way. Teacher tried to play him and got cooked. And then, beneath the excitement, another layer emerged. Voices naming what had been left unsaid for too long. Why is it always the black kid they try to humiliate? That man didn't want him to succeed. He wanted him embarrassed. The conversation had shifted, and Carter's name now carried weight. Not as a punchline, but as proof. At school, whispers followed him through the halls, but the tone was different now. Some offered awkward congratulations. Others stayed quiet, and a few tried to pretend they hadn't laughed before. Mason, once the loudest mocker, could barely meet his eyes. Whitaker, meanwhile, had retreated behind strained smiles and clipped lessons. The smug authority that once defined him had cracked, and the whole class could see it. The administration couldn't ignore the storm. Parents had seen the video, community members had called, and emails poured in. The principal announced a formal review. Students were invited to give testimony, and many came forward, not just about the equation incident, but about the subtle pattern of favoritism and humiliation that had defined Whitaker's classroom. For years, small slights had been excused as discipline or rigor. Now, strung together in a row, they painted a picture impossible to deny. Whitaker tried to defend himself, claiming his methods were about pushing excellence. But the evidence spoke louder. The deliberate targeting, the pattern of who was silenced and who was praised. By the end of the week, the district placed him on leave pending investigation. For Carter, the victory wasn't about seeing Whitaker fall. It was about finally being seen. Reporters called, podcasts reached out. Even a local college math department sent a note of admiration. But Carter didn't seek the spotlight. He gave one short statement, written on notebook paper and read aloud at the school board meeting. Mathematics is about proof. Proof doesn't care about who you are. It only cares about what is true. No teacher should use math as a weapon to humiliate. It should be a tool to teach, to open doors, not close them. The room had fallen silent. For the first time, Carter's voice carried further than the laughter that once drowned it. In the weeks that followed, the school made changes. A new tutoring program opened, available to all. AP classes were reviewed for fairness, and counselors received training on bias. Ms. Alvarez, once just the night custodian, was officially hired as a teaching assistant in the math department, her quiet brilliance finally recognized. Dr. Lang's Saturday Math Circle gained new members, many inspired by Carter's story. At home, the transformation was simpler but more profound. His mother came home one night with takeout, his father setting out plates. His little sister taped a printout above the dinner table, proof performance. They laughed together, the sound lighter than it had been in weeks. In class, Carter no longer sat invisible in the third row. He chose the front now, not for attention, but for presence. When another student struggled at the board, Carter raised his hand, not to show off, but to help. His voice carried calm authority, the kind that came not from arrogance, but from survival. He had earned it. The final image was not one of triumph over a single equation, but something larger. Carter stood at the chalkboard one afternoon, writing a clean, simple identity. Then he stepped aside and invited another student forward to finish it. When the class applauded, not him, but the student, it was clear the board no longer belonged to humiliation. It belonged to learning again. And in that moment, Carter smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for himself. Racism had tried to use numbers as a weapon against him. Instead, he turned them into a door and walked through it, never looking back. Thank you for watching. One teacher thought he could use humiliation as a lesson, but instead, he became the lesson. And this is just the beginning, because the next story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Subscribe now, so you don't miss the truth when it drops.